Imagine a gender equal world, a world free of bias, stereotypes, and discrimination, a world that is diverse, equitable, and inclusive, a world where difference is valued and celebrated. Together, we can forge women's equality. Everyone open your eyes. Collectively, all of us can break the bias. Before we dive into today's session, I want you to think about your life's journey. I want to think about where it began. Go back in time. Where did that journey begin? Where are you in that journey now, professionally, personally? And think 2 years, 5 years, 10 years ahead. Where do you want to be? Take a moment to reflect on that. And we are going to circle back at the end of the session, and we'll talk a little bit more about that reflection. And I also want you to think, what is the main thing that holds you back in the workplace, in your professional life? What is the main thing that holds you back? And think why. And hopefully through today's conversation, you may be able to have some tangible takeaways where you can take one step further to making that future happen, or to be able to change things that you thought you couldn't. As women, we have come a long way, baby, a long way over the years, but we're not quite where we need to be. In school, women get better grades than men in all subjects, including math and science. We graduate high school and attend college in higher numbers than our male counterparts. And nearly 40% of businesses here in the United States are started by women. But why are 80% of CEOs men? And in Fortune 100 companies, it's over 90%. Corporate boards are more than 90% male, and 75% of elected officials are men. We again start 40% of the businesses here in the United States, but 98% of venture capital goes to our male counterparts. And we didn't even hit on the technology. Women entering the technical workforce often feel alone, and the numbers prove it. The IDC, the International Data Corporation, reports women hold only 24% of senior technology leadership roles. Then throw in that pay gap and lack of mentorship and support. It's really difficult to see yourself here when you look around and may not see many people who look like you or share your experiences. Our guest speaker today has been able to overcome so many of these obstacles. She's been named Women of Influence by Silicon Valley Business Journal. She is passionate about technology and is an executive with both Fortune 100 and startup experience in enterprise software. She delivered 8-figure revenue at IBM, led engineering at Apogee to its IP. She built new products at Amazon. And as a TEDx speaker, she regularly speaks at technical conferences and owns multiple patents in analytics. 8, but I'm not counting. She's passionate about promoting diversity in technical companies and beyond. And she spends her spare time teaching product and innovation at Stanford Continuing Studies. It is my honor and privilege to introduce an extraordinary woman, a mother, a daughter, a friend. She is a woman who has broken through the digital ceiling, the director of engineering at Meta. Please meet Jin Zhang. Hi, Jin.
Thank you so much, Denise. That is a very kind introduction.
It's a true introduction, and we are absolutely honored to have you give up your time this afternoon to spend with us today. And I know we will be filtering questions from our group who has joined via Zoom, as well as the group on Facebook, as we are live streaming right now on Facebook. So my friends on Facebook, feel free to put any questions, and we'll try to get some of those questions to Jen. And same with my friends on Zoom. Any questions you may have for Jen, put into the chat, and we will try to get some of those questions directly to Jen. Jin, I want to start in the early stages. I want to go back in time to when you were a child. What was your dream job when you were young? What did you want to be when you grew up?
Denise, I really always appreciate, how you engage with our community, with our audience. I noticed, just now you immediately for people who couldn't, meet up in person or hear any voices yet. You already asked, what is your aha moment, right? How do you did you get to attend the previous workshop? And when you led us through that exercise of closing our eyes and envision the future, right? I think inevitably I also get to take a peek at our own journey. So that's like my past. Um, when I was growing up, I was born and raised in Inner Mongolia of China, a very remote state, even or province, even for most of the people in China. I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be a teacher because it's practical. I see plenty of, role models there around me, right? Some of my favorite teachers who's really made an impact about my value system, my choice of, future path and all that. Um, I think, it's both practical, but it's also something valuable I see as inspiring, being able to make an impact to someone. As you mentioned earlier when you were introducing me, I've later on realized, my path now is far away from that original plan, but that doesn't mean I couldn't do what I wanted to do back then. So in a way, I'm continuing in that interest and passion by now treating, teaching as my hobby. So I continue to teach, but just on the side.
You. When did you know that you wanted a career in technology? So you wanted to be a teacher. So this is a two-part question. Did you change your path because did you think that you were limited to, I have to be a teacher or I have to be this? And then what was the pivotal moment that pulled you into the technology field?
I think, when I was young, I did not even know whether I was a limiter or not, because that's what I see, right? I see most of, for example, in grade school, my teachers are female, and many of them had extremely positive impact on me. I still remember, the names of, for example, my elementary first grade teacher, the teacher who gave me that chance to enter when I was underage. Like I wasn't supposed to get enrolled, but but because I was ready, and she took a bet and let me come in, right? So it's these kind of story that really energized me about wanting to be a teacher. But I don't see a lot of other cases, right? In the town where I went through my college education, our computer resources was so limited that we only get to go into our computer lab once a week. And before we walk in, we have to change into, this lab coat and take off our shoes and put on the lab slippers. So that was, that's a precious, precious treat in order to go into the computer labs. I think, in college time, I studied international trade. I was fascinated about the human to human connection, the cultural challenges as we needed to communicate with each other, share with each other, yet has all these differences that we needed to recognize. So I focused on learning those, and that actually doesn't mean only learning about liberal arts, but no science. In my college, that is actually a double major with science focus. So we all had to go fairly deep, both for advanced calculus as well as some specific knowledge related to the physics in order to know about the merchandise that you're about to go import and export, right? Metals, textiles, et cetera, et cetera. But interestingly, when I then came to the US for grad school, it was my RA job, having to work as a research assistant, meaning doing work for my professor, research-wise, statistical analysis-wise in the lab. That was 1994. I still remember the moment when I, for the first time, connected to the internet through like a Gopher command. It was fascinating. It was fascinating, and it was that moment that made me think, this is so fun. I can spend days and nights here, right? So I pretty much lived in the 24/7 computer lab, having so much fun. And that was really what took me on to the tech path. I ended up learning about databases. I ended up getting the first job as a programmer, developing databases and database applications. So it's really a long way now look back about how this gets started, but it's very much serendipity. It's, it was never designed and planned that way.
And I listened to a podcast that when you were being interviewed, and you said your favorite part of graduate school was going to the lab. Is that correct?
Yes, definitely. Durham Center in Iowa State University, 24/7, the only building that never closes. And that's to an exception, even to our Parks Library.
That's fantastic. Jin, what do you think is the best part of being a woman in technology, a female in a male-dominated industry? What is that like for you? And what is the best part of that?
I would say the best part, and definitely not just for me, it is the confidence boost, right? It's the confidence boost that nerds or tech nerds does not all, do not all equal to guys. That tech can be super fun. And I'll give you an example. I, recently been working in infrastructure of cloud computing. And for me, it's fascinating because, I would go explain to my 76-year-old mom. It was like, Mom, remember this tiny country there, Bahlam, they have this very, strong soccer team. And she's like, yep, I know about that country. It's small, but they have a very good soccer team. I was like, we decided to build a data center there so that, when you request for your photo and videos, the cloud on top of you would just drop your video, right? And because we can't let you wait for too long, so we place many of these across the globe, and we decided to do one there. And this was several years ago, before, when AWS, my employer at the time, was building that data center. I mean, this is super fun. You can imagine the conversation, right, I'm having with my mom, with family here, about the things that are so tangible, right? That's what I do, right? So I shared this story a couple of years ago at Grace Hopper conference. I've been a regular speaker there, and then someone all the way in India, right? A lady, and I assume she's in the engineer field too, whether a student or a young engineer, I do not know. She wrote to me by LinkedIn, and she said, Jin, I just want to thank you that I listened to your talk, and I never knew tech can be this fun. I have been, stressed about the endless coding, debugging, right? Keeping up with the change of technology one after another. But hearing your talk and just your voice and the way you describe all the stories one after another, I now think this is fun, and I need to go broaden my search, right? Tech is much wider than I originally thought. I think that was a rewarding moment for me, right? Think about having women in tech and have that confidence to say, not only we can do it, but it's not that we can only do it by, endurance, by suffering. This is indeed fun. We're going to have fun with it.
I love the attitude. Thank you for sharing that. Jin, if you had to think of 3 words that would describe your journey from university to the director of engineering at Meta, what 3 words would you select?
I didn't do homework on this one because I think it's very important, right? It's important for me as a self-reflection. It's important for our attendees here today for this joint celebration of my community, right? Many folks are my dear friends and colleagues, and even mentors and coaches like you. So the word, I thought of one word that has 3 letters here, and that is DIY, do it yourself. And I will explain a little bit about why I pick each word. So do, right? I'm a doer. many of us can relate, right? Both in our, gender traits or cultural traits, right? Asian or Chinese, they're famously known for, you got to go do it. You should never shy away from working hard. You always need to put in your effort. You need to earn it before you ask for it. I was taught this way by mom and dad ever since I was a baby, right? So one example, when I was in IBM, early in my career, I needed to lead a team of product managers. We also can call them program managers or TPMs, et cetera, right? And I had the choice to either, just coach and support and lead the team, or at the time, this is a batch of new engineers converted to TPMs, and they needed to go through a set of fairly intensive IBM curriculum to be IBM PM certified. It's actually a step after you achieve your PMO, which is the industry standard at the time, right? So it was tough. It was many hours of commitment and a whole set of curriculum. So I took on the do part. I decided to go through this PM certificate and do it with the rest of the team. It took me late nights and time away from my young children at the time. It was a commitment. I remember myself hiding in the basement, like needing to have some quiet time to go through some of that study. But the fun thing there was not only I gained that very consistent language, right? Talking with the team, the vocab we use, because I knew the module they were studying, and we were, talking and discussing these together. But more importantly, it was this bonding. It was this time we spent together. It really was, the best investment I could do. If I was there to bond with the team, to lead by doing, right? We always have this, you walk the talk here. Do is very important. As women in tech or in any profession, right? One key thing there is we got to be the doer. The second word is it. It is where I struggle the most. What I mean by it is each of us need to define our own it. And this it can be different at different stage of our career, at different stage of our lives. It can be motherhood versus that next level of promotion, but don't view that as permanent, right? It's a periodic thing, right? It's a matter of what you're going to do for this 12 months, and be okay with that it you define, and then move on. I'll share another example. In 2013, I returned to the Bay Area along with my family after doing a merger and acquisition for IBM, which took me to live out in Boston for a few years. And when I came back to the Valley, I was amazed by the amount of startup meetings and the meetups in the evenings. You can pretty much go sign up one for Elasticsearch, go listen to one about MongoDB, where they're talking about SQL versus non-SQL databases. Go to one about VC funding and product building or UX design. It was all free, right? In fact, pizza and beer included. This was what's happening in the Valley at the time. So I called up my longtime mentor in IBM, right? Who just meant a lot to me. And I was like, I'm so shameful here. It's like, I've lived here for like all these years and I wasted this. I've never done this until now. And now I'm like trying to go there, go to these twice every week. He was very gentle. My mentor was very gentle to me. He reminded me right there on the spot. He was like, you should not be too harsh about yourself. You have to remember back then, your children were babies. They needed you. And with a full-time job and with your young children, you hardly had any breathing room, right? And why to go look for additional meetup meetings in the evenings? Versus now, at the time, I was like, your children are now in middle school, so you have a little bit more free time. So always be gentle about, don't be too harsh on yourself. This also reminds me, right? Many of us here probably have the role of mother for the household, right? And therefore, I'm sure each of us has our maternity, leave story, right? For my two children, it was fairly standard, about 4 weeks. Even for my second one, I was, the doctor has given me 6 weeks, but I ended up returning prior to that because of a business need. Today, for some of my colleagues at Meta, and I just use as an example, for the new dads, they have 4 months. And what I do is I encourage all of my colleagues here, especially the new dads, right? Go take your full 4 months. Go enjoy that time bonding. But more importantly, go offer that additional support for your spouse in the family, right? Because this helps them to define the it for them. And whatever you define that it is to be, whatever that goal may be for the moment, for this 6 months, for this year, for the next 5 years, just be happy with it and know that is your choice, right? We talk about this work-life balance. It's not a balance, it's an integration. And at any moment where you draw the line, if the line moves, that make sure that's your decision. And that really leads to the third, but also the probably most important word, that is the why. The why stands for yourself, right? So do it yourself here. And that was really about taking ownership. I think many of us, I've had the same thing, right? The sense of, unhappy, and this unhappiness is due to some other situation, some environment, right? It's the system, it's the type of the industry norm I'm in, it's the kind of the culture my group has. Take ownership, because if you've done the best you could, then you're in peace, right? You're happy with what you're able to accomplish. And if you've accepted to say, this is where I give myself permission to be, as long as I do this, these are the things I can control, and these are the things I do not control, right? But guess what? That attitude, that mindset change would allow us to collectively have more control. And that is indeed what I've learned. So circle back, I think, the word I would summarize here is DIY, which stands for do it, know what your it is, and then really focus on yourself. It's yours.
Jen, I love how you were able to take that question and turn it into a lesson. DIY, do it yourself. And your attitude is so optimistic that I wish we could put your attitude in a bottle and just call it Jin's thing and sell it, because that positive attitude, taking ownership, is what will propel us as women, or anybody, will make them get further in their career, further in their life goals. We as humans have a tendency to want to point the finger at other people. We have to take ownership of the things we can control. And the one thing that really stood out to me is when you were talking about a former mentor, you said he. So I, early in my career, had a male mentor for many decades. Can you tell us a little bit, you don't have to mention the name, but how this gentleman influenced or impacted your life?
He is a tremendous mentor for me, right? So Greg has been an IBM executive for many, many years. And when I first met him, I was only a first line manager. We call the relatively junior manager there. He was always available to me. And I always make sure I'm prepared. Like, I have a list of questions. I rank them, based on priority and urgency, right? I go through my scenario. I do my homework. I don't just ask general, very broad question. I have scenarios. I've done some homework, and I know exactly where I'm stuck, right? He's always very open, very generous. And then what I really also love there about Greg is, how sometimes when you go to a mentor, you want to be vulnerable. You want to share what you're really fearful of, right? And he's one of those who would always inject confidence back to me. Like the example I gave you earlier, right? I was kind of like, geez, how did I miss all these golden opportunities for all these years? And he's like, don't be too harsh on yourself, right? And then I was thinking about, there was a significant relocation at the time for me, along with my family and 2 young children, from the Midwest to the Bay Area. He was the one who went out of his way to, help me understand the complexity and the cost, or the sticker shot of moving to the Bay Area, right? And then, he was also the one where there were cases where I screw up. I remember one time, like I lost my coolness for a very challenging situation, right? And afterwards, I was extremely frustrated, and I had to now go repair when I didn't want to do, right? It's like I messed up. I'm very, just embarrassed about it, right? I went to him, and I still even remember, I can picture him on that phone. I had the phone on speaker. I was sitting there and making my confession to my mentor, right? And and he said one thing. He said, "You were wrong on that one." That was one statement. And then from there, we talked about how to recover, right? I always learned that moment and that lesson, which quite frankly, from there, I don't think I screwed up in the same place again. I did learn a lesson, but it was also such kind of mentorship, such kind of unconditional trust, support.
Mm.
It's okay if you fall, I'll just pick you up and dust you off. And by the way, this sentence was given to me by another female mentor of mine, right? You can see over the years how much I've benefited from a lot of people in front of me. But yeah, it's that level of support here really made me having that sense of, as you say, the positivity, the positive energy you mentioned earlier, because I know I got it. There is that supporting village behind me, that's for sure.
Thank you so much. We have a comment and a question from our audience members. So when I was saying I would love to take your optimism and bottle it, and somebody said they would call it gin tonic. So you will now be known as hashtag gin tonic. And one question, somebody asked, how can we find our Greg? How do we find our mentor or the right person to mentor us?
That's such a good question. In fact, I want to say, not only I'm so fortunate, not only in my life I have my mentor Greg, but I also now have mentor David, mentor Kai. I can name the whole list of them, and the magical moment they were able to offer me. I think the only thing I can share, again, we control what we can, is I want to be absolutely do the prep work, do my share, and be accountable for their time, just the valuable and the generous offering from them. So as I mentioned earlier, I do my homework, right? I make my list. I don't, if for anything, if it's general question, right, I critique. It was like, no, this is not good enough. I have to internalize more. If I did not do enough homework, then I don't raise that topic, right? I also go research my mentors or anybody I'm meeting, right, in order to maximize the potential learning opportunity. I'll share an example here, Denise, with you, right? A few years ago, when I had the opportunity to take a coaching session with you, I did my homework. So I looked you up. I went through quite a few of your training videos from On the Room that's currently on YouTube, right? I appreciated how you delivered in the room, talking about presence. I remember watching you for one of those. So these knowledge, these awareness, number one, already gives me additional learning. Number two is, by the time I meet you, I already get a sense about your style, your belief. And if I have any question there to really hone in on that, for example, the presence topic, I now can save time by accelerating all the basics I've already learned from your other materials and get to that next level that potentially may be bugging me, right? So just really treat it genuinely as a treat and think about how you maximize it. I think that attitude will definitely take you, to allow you to meet someone initially and really attract, this is kind of you nurture the reaction you're going to receive, right? Your mentor will want to invest in you because they see how much effort you're putting in and how much they may be able to also learn from you. Because, I also have a lot of mentees and I learn immensely from them every time.
Thank you so much for that response. Jin, how did you navigate power structures early in your career versus later in your career when you had a more formal leadership role?
Going back to our DIY, early, I'm a doer. So do is the answer, right? There may be doubts. There may be questions. There may be uncertainties. So I go deliver first. I go focus on delivery. Another mentor of mine, actually, also a previous manager, he would say, his strength or superpower is about execution focused or delivery focused, right? I think that I see it very common across women and tech women. So definitely I focused on deliver first and let the results speak to itself. And this is kind of how you earn that trust, right? Now, later on, once I had a more formal leadership role, it took me a long time, but I recognized that just, um, if you're in that formal leadership role and you only focus on delivery what's at hand and don't take more risk, that's a waste. That's underperforming. So what I do now is very intentionally, I ask myself to take more risk and take a bet, right? Because if you just did what was told, then why are you there, right? You could be, another team member at a much junior level. And what I mean by that is you take more risk for product and project strategy. You take a risk for seeing a customer or consumer need that may not be written all over or may not have a clear indicator today. That's the reward comes from innovation, right? This is where innovation would come from. But more importantly, since we're here talking about organization and talking about people and career growth, you take a bet on people, especially for underrepresented colleagues. For example, many of us will not raise our hand to say, I am ready for that high profile project that's usually designated to be led by people, 3 levels above me. Or I'm not ready for, that manager role because I've only managed a team of this size. And now for this job opening, it's about team of 5x of size, right? So they will not raise their hands. And interestingly, if I approach some of them for a one-on-one conversation, right, take one of them, downstairs for a walk on campus, if I approach them with the topic and they would say, are you sure I'm ready for this? By the way, I asked that same question, earlier in my career. The answer for you is absolutely, speed with conviction. That, yep, I know you can do it. I think you can. Why don't you say yes to this and we'll give it a try? And then you move on to talk about how to support them, right? Here is the team lead that will support you. Here is your formal and informal mentor. Here is the regular project reviews. But take a bet even before they know they can do it, because that will really change the overall posture for the entire organization. And here, what I mean is, if you think about do it and, or everyone think, you have to be data driven, result focused, you have to have the facts here. This person is already performing at this level and then put them there. Well, guess what? Because of how we've evolved, right, in tech or for women in professional fashion, we do not have enough data or we do not have enough population who've gone through this ideal phase. So how do you leap? And as the number you shared earlier, how do you go about catching up? It requires a level of faith. It required taking bets, by the way, and that is something being done all the time, right? It's, we see this happening with our male colleagues, with, whatever leadership or crisis situation all the time. So it's just absolutely crucial to take more risk and take a bet related to growing our URP colleagues. But this is something I indeed had to learn because it wasn't natural for me. I worry about my own reputation, right? Being potentially criticized about not being data-driven or result or fact-focused. But now that I've overcome that, I've realized, I'm just going to take a bet and I will be honest to say, I'm taking a bet on this team member or I'm taking a bet on this product direction. If we fail, let's celebrate that failure and we'll pick it up from there.
I love that. Taking risks, and especially women, we're afraid to take risks because we're afraid to fail. Failure to us, I think, falls on our shoulders more heavily than it may on our male counterparts. They may be able to brush it off more easily than we do. I think as females, as women, we internalize it and it becomes an emotional sticking point for many of us. So that's a huge takeaway for myself, and I'm sure for others on the call. So now that we're talking about taking risks and betting on others, have you ever felt imposter syndrome? And if so, how did you navigate your way through it?
I feel that all the time. That is a personal, improvement area that I'm very aware. I'm constantly grading myself, right? And whether I meet that bar or not, if there's something happened that I feel I may have disappointed or went below the bar I set for myself, it bugs me. It will keep me up at night. The way I have learned to deal with it is, I think first is I need to recognize it, right? I need to tell myself, see, you're in that moment now. And then from there, I don't really have a good way yet to get rid of it. I don't know if over the years I'll get better and better at it. But I've learned now that as soon as I recognize it, I will share it with the others. Meaning, this is when magically, my support village, they will always pull me up. They will always drag me out of it. I'll give you another example that's very recent. Yesterday, Monday, I did a strategy session with the key leaders, in my org. And the strategy session wasn't perfectly prepared. As you know, right, to prepare such a session require a lot of planning, a lot of effort. It require a lot of private, previous conversation to get some of the themes to emerge, to, make it more potentially more productive for a group activity, right? When all of us are putting in, and that's an expensive investment, right? For so many of us getting together for that session. But because I realized that timing was more crucial than how polished this is, and the fact that I may not be able to, even if by delaying this a week or two, to make it much more better or much more polished. Because I know my bandwidth and all the constraint I have, right? Both from time, but also just from knowledge and insight. It was time to gel with the team rather than for me to hide this in the room. And I do have this tendency to go hide in the room to polish it and make it so cool in order to take it out and to share it with my colleagues. I wanted to serve them. So I made a point, to say, let's just go do it. And I upfront confessed, this was not as polished as as I like it to be, right? But here's my intent. My intent was only to get all of us to step back and look at the strategic needs, what the business has changed and how we have to adapt to it. We may not ended up doing a polished post or publication to share with our internal customers or partners. But if this has got us all going through some deep thinking and start to understand each other's domain better, then in the way that is the primary goal. Afterwards, I had a few team members came to me and says, we benefited from that session, right? It went way better than I thought, and they pulled me out of it. So this is a timely example. As you can see, it happens to me almost every day since this one happened yesterday at exactly the same time here, right? Is I really suffered about holding off longer or just letting it go as it's still raw to my standard, right? But it delivered some value. And I now, had this leap where I'm at a newer level for this project. So that I'm able to take it to the next level.
Thank you for that. I am going to grab a question from one of our audience members, Teresa Chin, who's a LifeHikes team member. She said, Jin, may you share your thoughts on the issue of diversity in the tech sector, specifically in the US, not only for women, but BIPOC diversity as well. What strategies have you seen that work to move the needle?
Teresa, that's such a good question. So this year, I'm based in the Seattle Bellevue area of our Meta and sites. So this year, I took on a new responsibility or additional responsibility. I said I will be the executive sponsor of DEI initiatives for our site, right? So I absolutely share, the value and the need of what you brought up here. I don't have silver bullets, but I do want to share a couple of things that has come to my mind that require that we're doing various things about it, since we've been, working on this a little bit. The first thing is think about how to improve and increase the level of role models. which is precisely what we're talking about here, right? Whether it's, it's not just more women in tech, executive leadership, but also, people with, other DEI, community representation here. I think having more role models helps in two aspects. Number one, it helps the individuals to see there are someone who's just like them, who has just a similar journey as they've been out there, up there. So that is immensely, immensely powerful, right? But the second thing is it's also impactful to the orgs. Keep in mind, many of us, we do not have that awareness of what it's like for someone who's different from us. We did not have that day-to-day living experience. And therefore, we do not necessarily know what is the norm. And when there is more role model, when your leadership team has this more balanced and stronger DEI representation, the whole organization start to get comfortable with it, right? And this is how you change this from something very rare to something become a norm. And that is indeed what I was envisioning, when we early on did the closing the eye exercise. Now, just now we also talked about another aspect, which is go take a bet for individuals, right? I think that's important too. Sometimes we look at things that can happen systematically, policy level, but sometimes for me, day by day, I tell myself my job is to go enlighten, encourage, right? One or two team members. And that may be small, right? For if you look at this from the overall landscape for my org, for my company, but it indeed changes them personally. I can, recall stories where team members were thinking about leaving the industry entirely. And so it was a retention issue. And if a conversation, a walk helped them to change their mind and hang in there a bit longer, right? Leaning in before it's, it's so that they don't call this just a forever quit. If you putting a team member on a project, putting them on a manager role, taking a bet, or as simple as if one of us in the middle of working from home, short enough as you're presenting, as one of the children would come needing something. It's 4:30, they're starving, right? I would see this colleague, being very apologetic, completely upset, right? About, oh, I messed up this golden opportunity. I was going to deliver such a polished presentation in front of a large group of important people. I would just leave a ping to say, no need to apologize. We get it, right? That's exactly what happened to me and to many others, right? Those small ping and small nudges matters. They can be tiny, they can be very situational, but don't miss out for these opportunities, right? Finding a seat for a colleague at the table later on when we come back to the office, right? This is something I've done all the time. It's like, there's no space. The most important presenter owner for the project coming in late, very likely a woman or URP, team member here, there's no space at the table. What do? There's usually a little bit extra room where my chair is. So I would shift to the left and make a room to the right. These are the things I think we're very consciously trying, right? Both from policy level, but also just from individual site level. And of course, like early on, we talked about mentor programs, right? That's URP focused or DEI focused. I personally benefited for a lot of these. As you can see, the examples I've raised, right? So when there's such opportunity, I raise my hand. I'd like to be mentored. I will make time to learn from another mentor, right? So we definitely do quite a bit of that. If I may, Denise, share one more example, because I think Teresa's question is so relevant, and I want all of us to go back home and do some of these things, right? Is hybrid working. This year, so I sponsored this group called, Meta Infra Hardware Women. And we've decided that, so every year we decide on the theme, right? So for example, one time our theme was let our voice be heard, talking about how when we pitch a project idea, when we pitch potentially a contradictory or tough view, how do we not to get shut down, how to prepare for that meeting to go smoothly, right? We had this whole gamma, figuring out tips and tricks. So this year, our theme is embracing hybrid. And that is because by end of this month, Meta will be returning to office, right? But look at what a journey it has been for many of us, especially women and mom, right? For the last 2 years. You may have children who's not yet vaccinated. You may have, elders that you need to care at home. So it's not about turning a clock and everything will happen, resume back to normal like magic. So our theme here about embracing hybrid is really how to focus on the outcome, but allow as much flexibility that may work for our team members so that they can continue to contribute. And I will share my own personal learning, right? This requires deeper internalization, and I had to go through that. For example, if we say we're returning back to hybrid, we're giving you plenty of flexibility, but we do think, for the minimum, every Tuesday as an org, we will come together, all be back in the office so that when we schedule meetings, especially for things that require face-to-face, let's leverage that. I thought initially that was pretty fair and quite easy to do, right? But it may not be for some of my colleagues. Even for a Tuesday, every Tuesday, right? So in this case, you really have to internalize, because I had to. Does it matter? Do I want to make this hard for this team member so that she has to think about a different career choice? Or is it really okay if I step back to say, for that, I'll make an exception for whatever, because she may need to be the one who cannot be available every day after 2 for whatever reason, right? And then she can come back in and still get her work done when it's later in the evening, whatever the situation. Our life is complex. Embracing hybrid is much more sophisticated than what's on the surface. And I am still learning and internalizing about that.
Jen, that gave me the chills. Thank you for sharing that. And I'd love to share a question from Adam Tracy. We had some gentlemen join the call in support of International Women's Day and Break the Bias. His question is, as a male colleague, where can I go? How can I learn to be part of change for the better? How can he, as a male colleague, be able to implement change or make the work environment better for the people around him?
Oh, Adam, I love this question. So, first, in Meta, one thing I really love is we have this allyship training. So if you're my colleague, I would send you right to the class. Not kidding, but this is indeed very important, right? Allyship is something we highly, advocate within the company. And me, again, just look at all the mentorship, right? I've benefited so much from all the guys in my professional life here. Now, I recently invited a book author to come in and talk to my organization. And this book is something I want to recommend. I just pulled up here. This book is called Women in Tech, a Book for Guys.
Oh.
It's by Ava Helen. And the website, which is probably a little bit easier to remember, is called eqinspiration.com. Go read this book. Eva is amazing. She, as another tech, women, women leader in, woman leader in tech, she's gathered her entire career learning here into this book, where she interviewed more than 60, guys in tech to analyze what would work, how could they help. And these are very actionable suggestions to say, hey, maybe as a starting point, you can practice listening. Maybe as the next step, you can talk about sharing, making that seat at the table. Maybe then at the next step, you can then get to become that sponsor, right? She laid out this whole game plan about what we can possibly do. But I just really want to thank all of our, male colleagues who are here, supporting women, supporting DEI or diversity in general, it takes all of us to work on this together, right? Many years ago, I was given a talk to Atlassian's Women in Technology group, and we recorded this, which is still on YouTube today, right? I did a poll to say, hey, what are the potential topics you'd be interested? And they do this every month. So many of the topics has already been covered. So guess what we picked that time? The topic I ended up spending the entire session for is how to enlist support from male colleagues in your network. That is something both important for all of us women to learn, but equally important for our male colleagues to be aware so that they know how to offer help. Many of my colleagues here, right, in Meta, they often come to me and ask, what is appropriate? What should we do? What should we not do? Right? So it's a continuous learning for all of us, but start somewhere. I think the very first thing is to recognize allyship is so important and so much needed in order to make this, really change and get to the norm we want to be. So be an ally here.
That's a wonderful response. And Adam is a wonderful ally to have. He is my go-to male counterpart internally. When I have a silly question, I ask Adam if I could borrow his brain, and he's always willing to support me. I'd like to open the chat if anybody has any additional questions before we start to wrap. Please put your questions in the chat, and any of our friends who are joining us from Facebook Live, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat as well.
Time is definitely running fast on us, Denise. I now realize really we're almost ready to wrap up. It was like, oh, we still have all these stories that we didn't talk about yet.
All right.
Hi, if I can just ask something instead of putting in the chat.
Okay, if you would put it in the chat, we greatly appreciate that.
Awesome, I will do that.
Thank you so much. Oh, okay. So Sandy, you asked, what is one story you really want to share, Jin?
I prepared a lot of them because Denise made me do my homework, but I will share the first one come to my mind. Often Denise and I talked about this in prep for today's celebration, right? She asked, women often have this challenge that we want to do this for job, we want to do this for our family, we want to do this for our personal inspiration, hobby and interest. Where do we find the time? We cannot do all of these all together. And what I have learned, and I share precisely that same struggle, right? So what I've learned, however, one thing that helps me is think about how to find the same effort and then amplify the outcome. Make that 2x, 3x, but maybe it's a slight add-on of the effort, but not necessarily day and night, completely two different effort, because that will just get you stretched too thin. And the story I want to share here, and back to Sandy's question, right? Last year, second half of last year, I was able to deliver or complete one of my bucket list item. I've always wanted to deliver a TED or TEDx talk. And last summer, I was able to deliver that TEDx talk. Now, when I was first approached for that opportunity, I was panicking. I've wanted this opportunity for almost 8 years. I've been, persistently pursuing this opportunity for almost 8 years. And when the opportunity came to me, I was, in shock, had no clue what to do. This is where this kind of all the self-doubt kicks in. I've watched so many amazing, TED or TEDx talk deliveries. My topic will not be worthy. Nobody would want to come to listen to me. And, I'm just such an ordinary person that there's nothing going to be earth shattering, right? All that. It was my curator at the time. So I still did my work. I put a list of about 6 or 7 different proposals, right? Talking about, resilience, talking about women in tech, talking about the journey from Inner Mongolia, whatever the case may be. My curator, another amazing mentor and advisor, right? She said, Jin, what do you do these days at Meta? And I just, of course, went off right away, right? Hey, I'm responsible for, think about that millions of servers that runs behind, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. That's my job. I actually get to figure out how to best utilize them, make them run without any hiccups, and then, how to optimize the heck out of them throughout all these regions globally, right? And here's happening for New Year's Eve, here's what's happening for a Diwali celebration, et cetera, et cetera. She listened to me, and then she said, I think what you do every day is cool enough. Why don't you just talk about that? So I did. If you search on YouTube my name and TEDx, you will come to a topic that says 3 ways to extend the life of Moore's law. And if you're curious about what that means, you go listen to the 9 minutes. That 9 minutes was a pretty accurate summary of my day-to-day professional life today. It was also a pretty accurate summary of what my organization at Meta Infrastructure or Capacity Engineering collectively do. And because of that, I had tons of help preparing this together, validating the numbers. And because of this exercise, I was able to also bond with both team inside as well as communities outside, right? Both the tech community, but also the diversity community. When the teams ended up throwing this virtual popcorn viewing party together, right? For the evening when I was actually delivering the TEDx talk, I learned a couple of things there. Number 1, I highlighted what I do every day. Number 2, I use this to further connect with my family, my belief, my value, because I actually featured my mom, in that talk there, right? Remember earlier I talked about the story of my mom, and family is a big part of me. And then I get to use this to further bond teams, connecting teams together, both internal and external, right? With a lot of fun stories along the way. So if I was able to deliver one project with these 3 things that are both important to me, I think that's a pretty, worthy investment. And that's really the story I want to share. The lesson here is don't get this stress about you have to do more. Instead, if you already are doing one thing anyway, think about how else you can get this benefit to go expand. Take that route will make you feel much more in control, but also stay much more focused. You do one thing at a time, and then you can shift out to the next project. So that's my story, and indeed what I learned, very much from my own being, super panicked for, my long-awaited TEDx opportunity.
And I did see that TEDx talk, and I vividly remember the image of your parents that you showed when you were explaining your mom and technology. I have one last question that is coming from Bonnie. And Bonnie would like to know, Bonnie, I'm looking for your question. She wants to know more about how do we develop mentors and mining retirees?
Bonnie, I first want to applaud you. If you're the same Bonnie, I noticed when you first joined, you mentioned that you came to this session because your daughter shared that information with you. I also have a daughter, so I feel hugely, I just want to applaud you for coming, right, for that close connection with your daughter, because indeed, for many of us who have daughters here, right, if you kind of raise your hand using room here, you will see it's such a big chunk of our community. And quite frankly, what we're doing here is not just for ourselves, but also for our daughters and then the future, women generation. I love your desire to learn, to continue to seek mentorship, along the way, even as, during your retirement. So recently, I'm taking a Stanford continuing study class related to legal or social responsibility for big tech. Why? Because, I work there and I'm interested about this topic and I wanted to learn more different perspectives. About 2/3 of my fellow classmates are retirees. And I'm having a heck of a great time, right? Listening to them as we go through class participations or as we write in our Canvas, which is the online discussion forums there. They are full of wisdom. Man, we learn from each other immensely, right? So I guess that's the first thing come to my mind is think about these kind of continuing study classes, discussion forums, because it will help you to find those that you admire, you respect, that you have a sense about who you want to learn from, and approach them to say, can we have a chat? Can we grab a coffee? Even virtual. Can we do a walk and talk? Right? Another mentor of mine, Heidi, is famously known about, Jin, I don't have time for you, but if you can do a walk and talk, we can do it. Right? So we do a walk and talk. So yeah, that's the good way to find mentorship. But also another thing to keep in mind, I'm sure, Bonnie, you have so much to give back to this community as well. So do know as you support mentees, right? If as you maybe support and give insight to your daughter or to your daughter's friends here, that is also a way of mentoring. And as I shared earlier, I always learn more, right? Giving back this reverse relationship. So almost all relationship can be mentorship. They really don't have to be much more formalized beyond that.
Jen, that's a wonderful answer. We learn from the people we're exposed to on a regular basis. My boss, Bonita, I don't know if she's still on the call. She has been mentoring me, but she doesn't know that she's been mentoring me. And when we're in meetings or when we're working on a project together, I watch her and I almost study her because there are experiences that she has that I have not. And I try to lead by example. I too have a daughter, Jin, and I believe we've discussed our children in the past, but I try to lead by example. I don't tell my daughter to do something and then I do the opposite. So Jin, before we wrap the session, is there anything that you would love, any final words that you would like to share with the group?
I do know this is coming, and despite the fact that we're running out of time and we're 4 minutes over, I think it's still important to share this. I do want to make a call for action, right? And I want to share another story. At the beginning of COVID, Ursula Burns, the previous CEO of Xerox, a famous, well-respected women CEO here, right? And also being African American. She was in an interview talking about why we do not have more diversity on boards. And I went to that interview and listened because right now, a personal goal that professionally that I'm actively pursuing is I'd like to go serve as a colored woman on a public company's board. And this ties with, the role model and the continuously, challenge ourselves and learning and all that great stuff, right? But Ursula said something that took me a long time to internalize and reflect. And I think I'm still in that process, right? She said, there are qualified candidates out there. They may not carry, in this case, talking about board here, right? They may not carry the CEO title or even the CXO title that you're looking for. But they're absolutely out there if you're willing to focus on the core of the requirement rather than what may be viewed as must-have, but can be entirely artificial. And by the way, if you're willing to take some risk there without the quote-unquote official CEO title, right? I will grab all of these talents and train them and have them be the best board members for you, right? She was immensely powerful. So my call for action here, right? Sort of the final thought is don't underestimate what each of us can do. You may be hiring for a team member. You may be nominating for a candidate as you go through an interview. You may be looking for an intern You may be looking for an assistant for yourself. Large company, small company, women funded company, tech company, does not matter. There are something each of us can do. So the first thing we can start while we tell the rest of the world to focus on the core requirement rather than any artificial, must-haves here is widen your own lenses. Let each of us take a risk and take a bet on a non-traditional candidate for a role, for whatever that role may be happening in our life, right? Collectively, we will make this a much diversified, much more well-collaborated world.
Jin, that was absolutely wonderful. Thank you for your time. And before we wrap, we started the session where everybody was thinking about where their journey started, where you are on that path now, and where you want to be in the future. I want you to think about the discussion we've had, the conversation that we've had for the last hour, and please put in the chat, what is one thing that you can do? One small step that you can take in the right direction. What is one small thing you can do to get closer to that next level? Everybody put one sentence in the chat. What is that one thing? And I'm not talking about something grand, one baby step. Listen, I like that. And it's so simple. What else do we have? Lead by example, networking, don't quit, mentor, read a book, ask for help, keep it coming, everybody. So we can all become better. Most of us, the roadblock is here. There are people around us. All we have to do is ask. And most of us, we don't ask because we're fearful to get a no for an answer. And Jin, as we wrap this up, I wanted to share with you, when we were in the planning phases of today's celebration, I mentally kept saying, I want to get Jin. I want Jin. She's the best for this. And I told some of my coworkers, and I was afraid to send that email, to hit send, because I was so worried that you would say no. So I am glad that I pushed through that mental barrier, hit send on that email, and you were so generous to spend this afternoon, celebrating International Women's Day.